Hello. Today we're going to clean a trumpet. I've had a lot of students ask me about cleaning trumpets, or I've noticed students' trumpets that aren't even close to being clean or functional. And in the past, I've tried to describe how to clean a trumpet in a lesson. I've done master classes and tried to talk about cleaning trumpets or showed pictures. What I thought I'd do today is my trumpet needs a bath, and so I'm going to do it. And this video, hopefully you can just press play and clean your trumpet right along with me. And while I go through the steps, I'll point out the various things you need to be aware of and talk about what you may need and things like that. So you can see, uh, there's my trumpet, and it's in dire need of a bath. I'm in the kitchen. You could do this in the in a bathroom using a bathtub. You could use a utility sink. In a laundry room also works good, but you're going to need a source of water for sure. We're not going to submerge the trumpet. You're going to see what I'm going to do with everything here in a minute. But you need a place with a source of water, and then it's helpful if you have a place where you can spread out your trumpet and the parts and things like that. You'll also notice that inside the sink I put a towel. You need several rags. Don't use bathroom towels that you would normally use for yourself because they're going to get probably grease spots and things like that on them. So go to the rag bag and get a couple of good sized towels, and I fold one up and I put one at the bottom of the sink so that if I inadvertently drop anything, the towel's going to catch it before it goes down the drain or disposal. It also helps so that you're not metal on metal, run the risk of dinging anything. I put another one over there that I have my trumpet, and I'm going to lay my parts out. And one of the first things I'm going to do is just disassemble the trumpet. I'm going to set the mouthpiece aside. We'll talk about that later on. And all we're going to do is start by pulling out the main tuning slide. And then the other valve slides. Now, I've got a slide stop on my first valve slide. You don't even need to unscrew that all the way, and it can certainly stay right there while we clean it. On a lot of Bach trumpets, this is an aftermarket slide stop, so it only has the one screw, but you're going to unscrew this carefully and be very careful not to lose these small parts. Put them down on the towel over there, and these nuts don't really need to be cleaned either. So I'm going to set those up here at the top. And so I've taken out all the slides, all the valve slides. Know that a lot of trumpets, this end of the first valve slide, if it doesn't have a water key, it probably is a slide, and you can take that out. A lot of people don't even know that, and they've been struggling with getting water out of the third valve slide for so long. But if it has some sort of a stop on it and no water key, you might want to check to see if that's actually a slide, and if so, we're going to clean that out and treat that as a separate part. If any of the slides are stuck, you can, the biggest problem is slides get dry, and then if you pull one side harder than the other, it's now kind of jammed in one direction. You don't want to force it. If you're trying to force it, the brass is a relatively soft metal, and something's going to break, and the soldering joint's going to break, and then you get a big mess. So if any of their slides are stuck, you might just want to go to the music store, and for very low cost and very quickly they can usually unstick some slides for you and get it so you can get into your trumpet. So I've taken out all the slides. The next thing I'm going to do is take the bottom screws on the valves, and I'm going to unscrew those. Most trumpets, these aren't interchangeable. Well, they're interchangeable. It doesn't matter which one comes off of which slide or which valve. They can go in whatever order. However, it's not a bad idea because these threads can sometimes be tricky on some instruments. Kind of keep tabs on, this is the one that goes on the third valve, one on the second, one on the first. And all I do is just line them up in the order I'm taking them off. These have a tendency to get stuck. I'm going to show you later on how not to get them stuck. But if you do get them stuck, do not use pliers. Don't ever use metal on metal. Again, if they're stuck, take to a music store for very low cost, very quickly. They can get those unstuck for you pretty easily. They make plastic pliers that won't mar the instrument or do any sort of damage. You can use pliers, but if you use pliers, you're going to put a thick piece of leather or rubber in between so that there's something in between the pliers and the cap. My advice is don't try that at all. The third thing you can also try is a lot of times in your kitchen, if you've got pot holders that have the silicone on them, sometimes that gets a good grip on some of these parts and can move them without damaging them. So I've taken my caps off and I've laid them down on my towel in the order that they came off of the horn, 1, 2, 3. So all that's left now are these valves. And for those of you that may be cleaning your trumpet for the first time, you probably, or if you're a beginner, you're probably understanding that if these valves are in the wrong casing, your trumpet's not going to play. So you were probably shown right away, early on, that when you take out each valve, there's a number. You know, you're going to see a number 1, a 2, and a 3. So 1 is your first slide, or first valve, 2 is second valve, 3 is third valve. So take those out and line them up. And what you should have now is the body of the trumpet, a bunch of valve slides in your main tuning slide, and then your 3 valves, 1, 2, 3, and the bottom caps that come with them. All right. When we get to cleaning the valves, I'm going to show you, because this step that I'm going to do doesn't need to be done every year or every every time you clean the trumpet, but I'm going to do it today because mine kind of needs it. The valves do come apart. This top stem is screwed into the valve itself. And I'm going to show you when we reassemble the trumpet, why you might want to do this every couple of years or periodically. When you take this off, the spring can come out, so be very careful that the spring doesn't pop out on you, but that spring comes out. On the valve top, you'll see, this is the part that came, threaded that came out of the valve itself. This very top is actually neoprene on mine. I've had a valve alignment done on it, and it's a longer lasting neoprene rubber. With most trumpets though, this is going to be felt. And most Yamaha, Bach trumpets, most trumpets, they design those felts to be white. And they do that for a reason, because if you pull out your valve and you look at that felt and it looks relatively white or light gray, it's in good shape. If you pull out your valve and this felt is dark gray or black or barely existent or seems really thin, it's time to get a new set of felts. These felts are important because the way the valve comes up, that felt dictates how far up the valve comes in and how it lines up with the tubes. So if you see that felt looks really thin, or if it's dark gray or black, talk to your music store and get a new set of felts. To replace the felts, you just take the top cap and unscrew it. Carefully not to lose any of these parts. And then the top cap, and then you can take that felt off and replace it with a new one, then reinstall your top cap and reinstall the button. Being very careful not to over tighten, just snug things up and it's good to go. And you've just replaced your felt. Okay? But today I'm taking my valve tops off, the springs, and I'm gonna go ahead and leave my valve guides in there. The valve guides are in there. If you do need to take them out, you see how the top has kind of a round shape to it, and it's kind of opened up. You're going to take the valve guide up, spin it to the side, and then it comes out kind of sideways. To reinstall them, you're going to install, I'm trying to get a good camera angle on this, you're going to notice how the valve guide has a place where the spring seats down into it. If you look at the valve guide, this one's made out of metal, a lot of them are plastic, but there's a place where the spring will go down into it. The other side of it is flat, so you don't want your spring against the flat side, you want to seat it down into the guide itself. But, and then the other thing is, one side of the valve guide is sometimes just a little bit wider than the other, and so you kind of want to make note of that. And usually these valves are made so that they only fit in there one way. You'll see that one slot's slightly wider than the other. And so to reinstall it, make sure I got my wide side, you're going to just put it in, fish it into the slot at a slide, bring it up to the top, spin it flat, and let it drop to the bottom. And for today, I'm going to leave my valve guides in my valves, but that's how you would take them out if you needed to take them out or needed to replace them. Or if they come out in the cleaning process, that's how you get them installed back in there. Spin them to the side, fish them into the slot, bring it up to the top, turn it, and drop it down. And just make sure that the side for the spring to sit in is facing up. So I'm repeating this process with my second valve, taking the valve top off. My felts are fine, and I'm taking the spring out. I'm going to leave this valve guide. And the third valve, unscrewing them very carefully. Okay, so I've done that. Here's the step that I'm going to do today. I'll tell you about it, but this is a point where you may fast forward, not very much in the video, but what I'm doing is an additional optional step. And a few years ago, I learned about ultrasonic cleaning that a lot of the good brass technicians are doing these days. It's a non-chemical way for them to loosen a lot of the grime on your instrument if you take it to a music store, good brass technician. They will submerge the instrument in this, all it is water, but it's electrically charged, and it is sonic vibrations that will loosen a lot of the grime. And I had my trumpets cleaned like this several times, and I try and do it periodically with a good brass technician, just so I know it's getting thoroughly cleaned and adjusted. But a few years ago, I found that Harbor Freight and some of these other discount places sell small ultrasonic cleaners, and you can see mine isn't quite large enough to submerge my trumpet into, but all these small parts I can put into that ultrasonic cleaner. And it didn't run me that much money, and it was worth a gamble. I said, well, let me buy this thing and see if it works. It's designed for small machinery or jewelry, things like that, but it works good for this. And what I found is you can put your valves, all those valve slides, your mouthpiece, the tuning slide, all those small parts can go into that ultrasonic cleaner, and it's the cycle runs for about a few minutes. What's important to know, though, and I think what a lot of people think is like, oh great, I'll throw it in there and then I'll just take it out, put my trumpet together, I'll be good to go. It loosens all the stuff, so you still have to go through the cleaning process after you're done, but it gets the parts really clean and does a real nice job. So what I tend to do is get my small parts in there, and while I'm cleaning the body of the instrument, I'm letting those get ultrasonically cleaned, and you'll see how that works. If you want to try it, those are very reasonably priced. You can find them at discount stores, Harbor Freight, some hardware stores will have them. And if you look on Amazon.com, you might even get one big enough to be able to submerge the trumpet into. So there's really no prep or anything. I'm just taking these dirty parts and just submerging them in the water. And it's just tap water right out of the kitchen sink. And you'll see there's a line on the side of the bin that shows you how far to fill it up with water. And it's okay if the parts are touching or anything like that, it's fine. I'm going to put a mouthpiece in there too. Oh, and bottom caps. And so I'm leaving my top caps out of that because really these aren't part of the internal part of the trumpet. They're really not that dirty or gross. You could put them in there. The only thing to be aware of is if you have real felts, not the rubber neoprene, but real felts, I think it's a good idea. There's nothing wrong with getting them wet, but I think if they get wet, they're going to compress faster. So I've always tried to keep my felts dry and out of the cleaning process. And if this is real grimy, you could always take the felts off and clean it, or whatever you need to do, and then put it back together. But I think you're fine for most normal wear and tear. This part of the trumpet's not our problem. It's like the little screws and things. It's like, these don't really need to be cleaned. Same with the springs that came out of our valves. You're going to find that these really don't get all that grimy or gross or anything like that. I just keep them out until it's time to reassemble. So I put on the lid and turn it on, and that's going to make a little noise. And like I said, you got a few minutes here, and that's when I start the process of actually cleaning the trumpet. And I start with the body of the trumpet. And so this is my trumpet. I'm going to use the kitchen sink, carefully putting it down here. And warm water is fine. It doesn't need to be burning hot. Warm water is fine. Basically, we're going to clean our trumpet just like you clean dinner dishes. We're going to utilize whatever kind of dish soap you have. That's your degreaser. It's going to get your slide grease, old slide grease, valve oil, and fingerprints and things off of the exterior of the instrument. To get to the inside parts, you need yourself a snake, a cleaning snake, and these are very low price, and this is literally one that I think I bought when I was in high school, and I'm still using it. Here's a trick, though. This is actually a trombone cleaning snake. The brushes are a little bit bigger, and it works for trumpet if you want to try this. It's a plastic-coated snake, so there's a spring inside of it. If you have one that's just a spring without the plastic coating, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but these are pretty cheap, and so I just went for the plastic coated one. But you're going to need a cleaning snake. These are the other kind of favorite tools that I prefer. This is called a valve casing brush, and you can see that the brush is bigger for cleaning out the actual valve casing. This is a very old valve casing brush that I've been using for a long time and has been long since worn out, but I've hung on to it, and it's also good for getting kind of the ports on the valves and a lot of the kind of parts that are, don't get cleaned up by the snake too well, that need a little bit more brush, but not quite this much. So those are the three brushes that I use. And when I clean this trumpet, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with my snake, get a little bit wet. I'm going to put a couple of drops of soap right on the brush. And with that soapy brush, I'm going to get a little water down into my lead pipe, and then I'm going to just put that brush down into the lead pipe. I'm kind of doing 2 or 3 inches at a time and brushing the sides. And I want as much soap as possible, and I want lots of contact with that brush. And I work all the way through until it comes out the other end. And it's probably going to be some gross stuff. Send that brush through, and then I'm going to rinse that. And you'll see when you rinse out, the water will come out the other end. It'll probably be pretty gross. And so we're going to repeat that process. The lead pipe and the tuning crook are the two places where the majority of the problems occur in terms of grease and grime and gross stuff. This is also where much of the tone will originate when you're playing the instrument. So it's real important to get this as clean as we can possibly get it, which means just lots of soap and just keep putting the brush through. Let some of the water out. Bring this down. I'm just going to keep putting the brush through, maybe a little more soap. Keep running my brush through the lead pipe. Bring it back through. Turn the water on. Yeah. It already looks better. And you can also look towards a window or something. You can glance down in there and see if there's anything else that needs to be cleaned out. That's looking pretty good. So now I'm going to take my smaller brush, put some soap on it, and I'm going to hit all the places that I can get to. Second valve slide, first valve slide. See, these are straight tubes, so this slightly larger brush is pretty good for cleaning these out. That is the larger tube. So this bottom slide for the tuning slide is going to need the snake. Get it down in there. And we're going to rinse all these parts. valve casing brush, put soap on the brush, and clean out the valve casings, going from the top and from the bottom. So now that I've cleaned the inside of the pistons, the valve casings, I've cleaned the lead pipe real good, I've cleaned all those other tubes. You'll notice that with those other tubes, if you're just normal wear and tear playing and you cleaned your trumpet about a year ago, 6 months to a year ago, they're not going to be all that dirty. But getting the brush down in there is just going to get any little bits that might be in there out, and it's not a bad idea. So while it's taken apart, you're just going to hit those other things. But don't be surprised if all those other places you don't see a whole lot of residue. The other thing I don't really do a whole lot with is the bell. The trumpet bell doesn't really get grimy at all. Very little stuff makes its way through the valves to here. Occasionally I might run my snake down through there, or I might just run some water and flush it. And you'll see it come out the valve, or the valve casing. And a lot of times that's all you really need to do. And then be careful emptying out your water, because when you get the instrument filled with water and you tip it, it may come out the bell, which might be over your countertop. So just be careful with that. Now that we've cleaned the inside parts, what I do with the outside is this. I take a face cloth sized rag, and I'm going to put some soap on it. Remember, the soap is our degreaser, and I'm just going to dampen it a little bit so it starts to sud. And all I'm going to do is use this soapy rag, and I'm just going to get the outside, particularly the slides. You want to get as much soap in around those slides and the valve casing where your hand lies. And what this is doing is it's degreasing all the slide grease, valve oil, and stuff that gets on this, but also all the oils and acids and things from your own hands from playing it. And so I'll just kind of do a once-over on the whole body of the instrument on the exterior. And after you do this, you'll notice right away, you'll go, oh yeah, that does feel better. When I'm doing this, I'm always aware where the edge of my sink is. I'm really trying to not ding my trumpet up against the side of the sink or the side of the tub or wherever you happen to be working. That's another reason why I think those towels it's a handy way to clean the trumpet. It's just, if I do bump in over here, I'm going to hit the towel instead of anything else. So now, the inside's been brushed out with soap and water. I've gone over the outside with my soapy rag, and I've rinsed the whole thing. It's clean. I'm going to take another rag and just wipe off the water. And this is just like washing your car. You're just going to take that excess water off, and the rest of it will air dry, so you don't have to be too finicky. But you'll notice, after you get it dried, silver instruments, you'll look at them and go, that looks a lot better, actually. By taking a lot of the grime and hand residue and fingerprints and things off, you'll find that silver instruments seem to clean up pretty well. I'll show you later on what you can do to polish a silver instrument if you want to polish it. But for most of the time, I'm not that finicky about the brightness of my silver instruments. I'm mostly concerned that they're clean. So I tend to let them tarnish slightly. There's a little black hue of just oxidation, but there's nothing wrong with that. It's just the way it looks if you don't, use silver polish or a polishing rag. But I've always found that, well, if you just clean it with soap and water, when you get done, you go, well, that looks a lot brighter anyway. So it seems to take care of some of the silver polishing issues. So that's the body of my instrument all done. And it coincided nicely with the completion of our parts that we did in the ultrasonic cleaner. And just as I suspected, the water, remember it was just tap water that I put in there, and it runs its cycle. When it gets done, it looks pretty murky and muddy, meaning that those parts had some grime and grease on them and grossness. So I'm glad I ran it through there. If you don't have an ultrasonic cleaner, you're just simply going to clean the parts like I'm going to show you now. And you can reach in. It's not going to electrocute you or anything like that. And you're just going to take these parts out and lie them down on your towel. Second valve. Third valve. And the first valve. So if you're using an ultrasonic cleaner, you saw I just stuck my hand in there. Once the cycle is run, there's no electricity going through that water. Even if there were, and I've done this just to experiment, you're not going to get electrocuted or shocked. And the water is warm, but it's not going to burn you or anything like that. So it's gone through the ultrasonic cleaning. That water's murky and gross, so I'm glad I ran them through there. But if you don't have one of those, it's not a big deal. We're going to do the same thing. You're just going to pick up from here and clean these parts. And let's start with our valve slides. Actually, we'll start with the tuning slide, which is the easiest to show you on. So a lot of gunk builds up in here, so we're going to do the same thing with our cleaning snake. We're going to use soap and water, and we're going to run it through however many times it takes. Here's another thing you can do with the valve slides. You can take and put about 1 drop of soap right in there and put a little bit of water. You don't have to fill it up. You can block off the slides and shake it, and that's getting that soap all around inside the slide. Then you take your soapy snake, get it down in. The tuning slide is one of the few parts that are bent around that you should be able to work your slide all the way through. If it doesn't go in, if it doesn't go all the way through, it may just be getting caught up on the water key. Just insert from the other side and it may go through. And same thing's cleaning your lead pipe. You're going to kind of scrub the inside little by little, a few inches at a time until you work all the way through. And be careful when it pops out because it'll sometimes spatter. Yep, it's all the way through, and I'm going to bring it back, set that down for a second, start my warm water. Put the water on one side of the tuning slide and you'll see it come out the other. It's going to be murky at first. And just let it flush until that water gets clean. Repeat the process a couple of times. So now I've flushed the water through. It seems to be fairly clean and fairly clear. Now we use our soapy dish rag from cleaning the outside of the trumpet. A little water on it. And we're going to clean the slides. Get that old slide grease off of the slides by using our soapy dish towel or soapy rag. And we're also going to get the silver or the polished surfaces, and we're going to get the fingerprints and residue off of that as well. Open up your water key and get in between the water key and the slide. If you see that your water key, sometimes they're made out of cork, sometimes they're made out of rubber. If they are getting worn out, you may want to stop by the music store. That's an easy, quick repair. And we rinse. Once you're rinsed, you take your dry rag, soft dry rag, wipe it down, get the moisture off. It's going to air dry, but that is a clean tuning slide. And repeat the process with the other parts. These slides, these smaller slides, don't take very long at all because they're so dang short. Drop of soap. Shake that around, get back in there with the brush. These small slides, that brush is not going to go all the way around the corner. You can sometimes work and bend the bottom one, get all the way around the corner, but remember, these valve slides aren't, you'll notice they're not going to be nearly as dingy as your lead pipe and tuning slide. Those are the most critical things to clean, probably several times. But you just want to get down in there as far as you can and get some soap and water down in there. And then take your soapy rag and clean the exterior of, clean the surface of the slide itself and the exterior part. And once you've done that, you rinse the whole thing, and you flush the whole thing out. Watch until clear water comes out. Dry it off real quick with your rag, and you're ready for another one. A little shot of soap, a little shot of water, shake it around, get your brush down in there, flush it out, use your rag to do the exterior and the slide surfaces. Shot of soap. Snake. Flush it out, clean the outside. And then finally, my last slide. Some soap. Good. So now all of the slides are clean and ready for reassembly. This is a good point before we clean the valves to discuss very briefly the difference between having your instrument professionally cleaned and doing this yourself. It's always a good idea, and I know a lot of music stores offer a very reasonably priced, professional cleaning. It's not a bad idea, and especially when they're taking a look to make sure there's no damage or anything like that. It's not a bad idea to do that. If you're a college student or playing professionally, and a lot of us, I try to get mine professionally cleaned, even if it's functioning fine. I'll send it over to my repair guy, and he'll professionally clean it, ultrasonically clean it, and check everything every couple of years. And I'll try to do this every 6 months or 6 to 12 months. I'll do this myself in between those visits to him. If you're a middle school or high school student, if you purchased your instrument new or from a rental program and you did this about once a year, you're probably going to be fine until you get to college. However, if you're using a really old instrument, or if you're taking these slides out and you notice a real like bright green chalky appearance, that's the brass starting to react, and that's usually a good indicator that maybe it's time to get a ultrasonic cleaning done at a music store, or one of the old chem cleans at a music store. Just talk to your music store about that. But that's if you see real thick, green chalky stuff on the inside of your instrument, if it seems to be in real bad shape. And then also keep in mind, if you got any stuck slides, which a lot of people do, or valve issues, it might be a good idea to take it to the music store, have them fix that, and then while it's there, have them clean it, and then just try and clean it more frequently on your own, like this, in between those visits. So now the valves are, you've got this whole valve. The reality is this part up here really needs nothing. It doesn't really get all that gross and doesn't really need anything. This is the part of the valve that comes in contact with the casing. This is what needs soap and water, and we're going to get inside these ports. And you'll see after you clean one of these a couple of times, there's really only three ports here. And so you're just going to, this is where I use that other orange brush to get in between there. But if you don't have one of those, your cleaning snake can get in there, and you're going to try and get a lot of that residue out of those ports. And then we're going to use the soapy rag to clean the outside real good. This has come out of my ultrasonic cleaner, so that's one of the nice things is I know when I get the residue from the cleaner off with this soap and water, this valve's going to be very clean, and that always helps when I reassemble. Just going to put some soap on my brush. This is valve number 1. And then I use the soapy rag. And you can get some of that moisture off of it. It's worth mentioning that this is the heart of your trumpet, and so it's real important that these don't get dropped or anything like that. That's why I don't worry about cleaning this top. I'm using the top as a firm grip to hang on to this so that there's no chance of me dropping it or getting it dinged. If you get a ding or a dent on this, it's not going to line up perfectly with the inside of the valve casing, and you've got some problems. You got to take it to a music store. So just be super careful how you handle these instruments while they're out. Sometimes the bottom of the valve needs a Q-tip. We're going to see how I do the bottom caps with that. You can do the same thing down here if you see a lot of grime on the bottom of the valve. But after that, that should be all set. I'm going to repeat the process on number 2. And use my soapy rag on the outside. So that's how to do the valves. Almost ready for reassembly. The last thing that we haven't touched yet are the valve bottoms, which tend to actually get really gross and grimy. And sometimes unscrewing one of these and taking a look is a good indicator of whether your trumpet is a candidate for a bath right now or not. Because if you see a lot of buildup on these, then that's a good sign that things have worked their way into the instrument and down to the bottom of the valves. Time to clean the horn. The ultrasonic cleaner has loosened a lot of the stuff up on these, but the easy thing to do is just take an ordinary Q-tip, and you're just going to firmly grasp it and just kind of go around those threads on the inside, trying to get a good angle on this, and the rest of the valve bottom, and that's how you do it. Those are cleaned out. All right, which means the entire trumpet is now clean, and it's time to reassemble the thing. I like to start with the valves first, and so if we take our clean first valve, a bit of water, we're going to insert the spring back in, make sure it's seated into the valve guide, and then here is a brass trick that it took me a long time to learn that I think makes a big difference. You'll notice that the valve stem has got threads here, and those thread into the top of the valve and hold the spring in. You'll notice most brands of trumpets, this valve stem is made out of aluminum. And if you look at most trumpet valves, this valve top here is made out of brass. And if you learned in chemistry class, brass and aluminum don't like to get along. And so you'll see a lot of older trumpets, and you can see oxidation and corrosion where those two parts meet. And those will corrode bad enough that they can't be unthreaded, which means you can never get the spring out, which isn't a big deal, but I've seen them become so corroded that they'll snap off in the middle of somebody playing. And so it's not the end of the world if you're looking at your valve and you can't get this unscrewed because of bad corrosion that you see at the top of this. It is a repairable thing. It's surprisingly not as expensive as you think it would be. But in order to prevent that, if you've got a fairly new trumpet and you see that you've got brass and aluminum parts, all we're going to do is take a small bit of slide grease. I'll put about that much on my finger, and we're just going to hit those threads with a little bit of slide grease. And that slide grease is going to act as a buffer between the aluminum and the brass, and it won't become corroded. If your valves make a lot of noise, if you can hear the springs an awful lot, some people will put just a little bit of slide grease down into that seating cup for the spring, and sometimes that will quiet a valve. I'm not going to do it now. Mine's not really problematic, but I do, whenever I do a thorough cleaning like this, I do put a little bit of slide grease on those threads before fully reassembling my valve, and it's so that they don't become corroded. And those go together nicely, and you've got one fully assembled valve. And I'll do the same thing with the second valve. I'm using Schilke slide grease, which I've used for a long time. I like an awful lot. Hetman makes a real good slide grease, but I'm not, when I'm working with students, pretty much anything will work. I just tell them I generally prefer to use the kind of slide grease that comes in a small cup. I'll show you here in a second when I get this assembled. The reason being is you can see how there's a lot of places where you just put slide grease on your finger to be able to apply enough of it. And so those small toothpaste tubes don't seem to get enough slide grease out for me. The little chapstick slide greases don't seem to work very well either. So I buy these little cups of slide grease, and that way I can use as much as I want. So this is the third valve. Putting a little bit of a slide grease bearing. barrier on my aluminum part of my valve and screwing that into the valve very carefully. And like I said on the onset, this is also a good time to replace those felts if your felts are dark gray or black or show signs of being compressed. You want those to be white. These are rubber, so they're not going to be white, but a lot of trumpets you're going to find those are going to be felt. Very inexpensive. It costs about $1 for a set of them. If you go to the music store, though, make sure that you're getting the felts that are designed to the thickness for your valve, for your brand of trumpet. So if you have a box Strad, get box Strad felts. If you got a Yamaha Zeno, get Yamaha Zeno felts. You can also find them online. Amazon sometimes covers them, or you can find them on eBay, a bunch of different places. Good. Valves are reassembled. All that really remains is putting the slides back together. I'm going to show you how to do this with the main tuning slide first. And this is one of the things that I think a lot of people are never shown how to do well. And as a result, the slides get stuck or they just don't function very well. And so what we're going to do, we have our clean slide, and you'll notice that the tubes feel very smooth and very clean. After going through this process, we're going to take our tub of slide grease, and we're going to get a pretty good amount of slide grease on your finger. And you're going to apply the slide grease at that part of the slide. And you'll notice that there's a good amount of slide grease, and we didn't smear it all the way down, all right? We just put it in the first inch or so of the tubes, all right? It's good to have your rag handy here. I got one down here below the camera. You can wipe your finger off as you go. But once you have slide grease applied to the two slides, you're going to take the body of the instrument and you're going to go, okay, the slide goes in, you know, this way. You're going to use each tube and you're going to do one tube at a time. And you can insert it just a little bit, and then you're going to make circles. And you can hear, when you hear metal on metal, or you can hear it, you can feel it in the slide as you're moving it too, then you just want to stay right there and make circles until you don't hear that metal on metal. And then you go about 2 inches down and keep making circles all the way down the slide until you've gone all the way to the end of the slide. All right? So what we're doing here is we're gradually moving the slide grease down the slide, and we're also greasing the inside of that outer tube as well. And that's, I think, one of the more critical parts to making the slide work well. And you'll also notice that when you do it this way, the slide, greasing your slides tend to last real long as well. So we're going to do the same thing. You can kind of hear that scratchy. There it goes. And I'll go a little further, a little further. Whenever it starts scratching, I'll just stay there for a second. Work all the way down until I get to the end. A little bit right there. Must be way down in there. And then you put your slide completely on. Push it all the way in. And if you've done your job right, you'll see there'll be some excess grease. And that excess grease is easily removed by your rag. And if there's excess grease, it's a good indicator that you probably used enough. And if you get through that process and there's not very much, if any, slide grease there, you probably didn't use enough. And so usually students are very surprised when I show them just how much slide grease to use. Be liberal with this. The stuff is cheap, and it's going to help your trumpet play better and function better. And that's one of the things that most people aren't aware of, that the slide grease is allowing your parts to move easily, first of all, right, and for you to be able to play your trumpet easily. But it's also serving as a sealant. So it's sealing these brass, metal on metal parts. And what you'll find is a trumpet that's fully greased and cleaned really well is actually usually going to slot better and play better. So it's a good idea to get that slide grease on there. And then whenever you're using your trumpet, you start to feel your valve slides hanging up or your main tuning slide gets a little sticky, just take a second, wipe the slide down, put on new slide grease, and stay on top of it, and you'll never have to worry about a repair. So we just did our main tuning slide. I'm going to repeat the process here pretty quickly with the first, second, and third valve slides. So it's the same process, just on a smaller slide. We're going to put a liberal amount of slide grease on the first ½ inch or so of this little slide. This happens to be the water slide for emptying out the water on my third valve slide. And I'm going to line it up as if it's going into the trumpet, so I know which slide is going into which one. I'm just doing one at a time. And I'm going to smear that slide grease around the inner slide and the outer slide. And I'm listening for any metal on metal sound. And when I hear that, just keep going in circles. Good. Put it back together. There's a little residue, a little left over. Wipe it off. And we're good. The second valve slide, a lot of people are like, why do I even need to put grease on that? Remember, it's sealing up your trumpet so it'll play better, and also we need to be able to take this off for when it's time to maintain it. So I think even though it's not a slide that we move very frequently, it's never a bad idea when you clean your trumpet, get a good amount of slide grease, and as ridiculous as it may seem, repeat the process. You can make little circles on one tiny little slide, then flip it, and do it on the other one. And on most trumpets, the little pull, they call these ears, I believe, is going to go on the outside. So occasionally, you know, this is usually exactly the same size. And so sometimes I'll see students and it'll be like that, and the ear will be on the inside. It's like, well, that's technically, although I think it doesn't really affect the playability a whole lot, that little ear is going to be on the outside. The only ones that remain are the first and third valve slides, which on my trumpet are set up as a male-female, and so it gets a little tricky because you know, you want to apply the slide grease to the inner slide, and then do it on the trumpet itself, and then you're going to repeat the same process. And when you're doing these slides, sometimes it's hard to make a full, you know, circle or anything like that, but you're just going to, with as much, you know, range of movement that you can get, you're just going to try and get as much circulation happening as possible on either one. But sometimes with these rings and everything installed, you're not going to have a whole lot of room to make circles. Just kind of get in there, move it around, the whole slide on, and wipe off your residue. Those are functioning pretty good. It's at this point I go ahead and take a second. I tighten on my stop rod bolts and everything. and make sure that all my slides aren't going to fall off or anything. I've got this aftermarket Bach third valve slide rod that's a little different than what's standard on most instruments, but if you've got a Bach, when you put those on, there's going to be two of those, put them both on, and then take the outer one and bring it to the end of the stop rod. It'll be on this end. And then take the inner one, and you want to screw it up to the point where the outer one is, and then twist them together like that, and twist them together pretty good so that they don't vibrate off. The reason why so many people either don't have these stop rod nuts on Bach Strads or they only have one is the vibrations of the horn will let those bolts kind of vibrate off, and then they're on somebody's band room floor somewhere. So the nice thing about doing the valve or doing the slides first is you don't have to worry about the valves popping or anything like that. When you put down a valve or when you insert a slide, it creates that vacuum. So you'll hear the instrument hiss and the valve will pop. And generally speaking, that valve popping is not going to damage the instrument per se. It's just if you do that over and over again over a long span of time, it sometimes can affect the wear of the valve itself. So I generally tell students, yeah, avoid doing that. But if you happen to do it when you're moving a slide and it pops, don't go, oh, I just messed up my tree. You really didn't. It's fine. So all that's left are the valves. So we talked about slide grease and Hetman and Schilke, or anything that comes in a little cup like this is usually what I recommend. With valve oil, I've been using Hetman for many years. I use the number 2, just their standard valve oil. Works great, but I'm not, I'm not opposed to any other brand valve oils. And what a few brass techs have told me over the years is there's very, very, very little difference between most valve oils. So what can I get a good deal on? I've noticed that these Hetmans cost a little bit more, but I find myself using them a lot less often than some of the other brands. So I think it lasts longer for me. The other thing that I'll tell students is sometimes when their valves are sticking and they oil their valves and they find their valves are still sticking, it's usually a good indicator it's time to do this and clean your trumpet. If you clean your trumpet, regrease your slides, oil your valves, and they're still sticking, an old trick that somebody showed me once is sometimes when you change valve oil brands, you can sometimes get a valve to work a little bit better. I don't know why or how that works, but it's just, something you can try if your valves are sticky. What we're going to do here, putting together our trumpet, we're going to start with these bottom caps. And what I'm going to do in order for them to not get seized, I told you I'd show you this trick, is we're going to drop 1 drop of oil on each one of those. And you'll see when that oil hits the threads, it'll kind of go all the way around. And that's, again, just giving you a little barrier between the two metal parts. And I think it's going to help get it, from these parts to get seized or to break, or to get stuck on there. So 1 drop of oil on the bottom caps. Do you need to do that every time you oil your valves? No. But while we have our trumpet apart and while we're doing all this, I just take care of it then. The next time I do this to the bottom caps may be the next time I do a thorough cleaning. And then we're going to insert our valves. Got just a little bit of slide grease on this one when we reassembled. And if you're doing this kind of cleaning to your trumpet, you probably know this by now, but just as a reminder, remember first valve goes into the first valve casing, second valve, third valve, and your trumpet, most likely the number faces the mouthpiece if you were playing it. Some brands, I've noticed that they put the number so it's facing the bell. Just know what your trumpet is and make sure that you're putting the valve in the right valve casing and in the direction that it should be in. And just remember that these little side pieces on your valve guide need to click down into the valve casing so that it doesn't spin. But before doing that, I'm going to put just a couple drops of valve oil on the silver part, that lower part of the valve. And then, yes, same thing. While I'm here, I'm going to put 1 drop, I'm trying to get a good camera angle, 1 drop on those top threads. I'm going to do all 3 valves here while I'm right here. So I've done the top threads, and I've put several drops on the valve itself. Work it down in there. it's seated well. Screw that valve on, and we're in good shape. And we're going to repeat with the second valve. And finally, third valve. This is not a bad point to get a clean, dry rag with a good surface to it and just wipe down all this excess valve oil and slide grease that may have found its way to the surface of your instrument. And what you'll be left with is one clean, ready to play trumpet. Everything's in good shape. You'll notice your valve slides are definitely greased well, and if you're using them, you're probably going, yeah, they move easily, but they're kind of stiff. You can do this. You can open up your valve slides. Let me get a good angle here. And then we're just going to put a couple of drops of valve oil on the slides that we greased. And then kind of let that work into that slide grease. And you'll find that usually gets it working real good real quick. All right. The other thing you can do is just say, well, they're kind of tight. If you just play your horn, the condensation, the moisture from your instrument will kind of get worked into that slide grease. It'll thin out in probably a few days or a week or so, and that'll work good too. So you can either add a couple of drops of valve oil to your quicker moving slides and do that, or you can just kind of fight through it for the next week. Hetman and some other brands do make a lighter or a different viscosity slide grease or slide oil that they use that's designed for these movable slides, and I've used that in the past. It works very well, but to me, just the standard slide grease with a little bit of valve oil works real good too. So it's up to you if you want to venture down that path. I told you earlier that I'd give you some hints on polishing. I'm not a big fan of polishing. I'd rather spend the time in the practice room, but if you want to get a shiny, more brilliant finish to your silver instrument, the only thing we would do differently from this process you just watched is when we had everything apart and as we were cleaning them, after I would clean the parts, I would then have something like right silver polish here, and it comes with a little pad, and almost like waxing a car, you're going to put a bunch of silver polish on this, and you're going to clean that part. So if I'm doing my tuning slide, I would do that silver part of the tuning slide. I'd get all in there. If you apply just a little bit of water, that silver polish will get into all those little nooks and crannies and cracks. And here's the thing. For a long time, I would polish my silver instrument with silver polish in the state that it's in, kind of after cleaning it, and I'd find that all that dried silver polish would all get in the cracks, and it'd be real difficult to get off. It'd be hard to remove, and be a mess. And then I watched a repair person do it once, and he did it as part of this cleaning process. He cleaned the part, applied the silver polish, and then used the water and rinsed everything out, rinsed that silver polish off, and then finally took a dry cloth and kind of buffed it. And that's a real good way of cleaning your silver on a silver instrument. You can work your way through. You can do the whole body of the instrument before the valves and the slides have been put on. You can do each slide by itself, but everything's the same. You're going to take that silver polish and get it in as much stuff as you can, and then use your water and rinsing process to get it all off, and use a dry cleaning, dry terry cloth to kind of do a final buff. And then you reassemble. You put the slide grease on the slides and put the valve oil to the valves, and you'll be left with a really, shiny silver instrument. A good way to maintain a silver instrument and keep fingerprints off of it is this is just a little bit of mint rubbing alcohol in a spray bottle that I got at Walmart. And if you spray this, I've noticed some of the manufacturers that I was seeing at conventions would spray the instruments down. That rubbing alcohol gets the fingerprints off and gets those oils and residues off, and it quickly wipes off and quickly evaporates. And that's a good way of maybe, keeping your silver instruments looking a little bit better. If you have a lacquered instrument, you can do the same thing. You don't ever have to polish it, but when you get done this final step, you can take silicone Armor All from your car and just a couple quick spritzes of Armor All and wipe that down with a rag, and that Armor All will protect it just like it does your dashboard. If you have a slide, a tuning slide that's stuck or has a lot of buildup on it, you can use straight, Wright's brass polish and get that slide polished up. And by polishing that slide, it's going to function a lot better. Be careful that you don't polish your slides too frequently. I would only do it if it's absolutely necessary, if it's really not functioning well, or if it's too tight. Because every time you're polishing something, you're taking the upper layer of oxidized metal off. And we're talking about a very, very slight amount. So you're never really going to hurt your horn, but it adds up over time. So I had a student once that liked to polish his slides because he liked the way they looked when they were polished. And after a while, they start leaking. That you'll start noticing little bubbles of air or bubbles of, moisture bubbling up, and they'll start to leak more quickly. And so, I'd avoid doing that every time. But if you have a slide that's got a lot of buildup on it, then you can simply brass polish it off, and it'll bring it back to new, in a very short period of time. I'm trying to think. Oh, mouthpiece. The other thing that you're going to need in your arsenal of stuff is a mouthpiece brush. These are super cheap, and you'll notice they're tapered, and you need to have one of these. Valve oil, slide grease, and mouthpiece brush I tend to keep in my case. The snake and the valve casing brushes and a lot of this other stuff I don't really carry around in my case because I'm only using it a couple of times a year. But valve mouthpiece brush is an important thing to keep around with you. And you're going to take your mouthpiece. This builds up a lot of stuff. And if you look down into the mouthpiece, you'll see there's usually a good buildup of all sorts of stuff in there. And the thing about mouthpieces, and even your lead pipe, is if you're just playing them every day and not cleaning them, you're kind of adjusting to the resistance and to the way that buildup is making your horn play. You don't even notice a difference until you clean out your horn. You go, oh my gosh, this makes such a difference. So cleaning your mouthpiece, in an ideal world, I try to clean my mouthpiece nearly every day, because you'll see it only takes a second. And I try and get into my lead pipe and tuning slide every week to a month. And then I try and do one of these thorough cleanings every 6 months to 12 months if I can. But the mouthpiece is pretty easy, and good old soap and water is going to take care of most of the external parts of the mouthpiece and the cup. And it's going to get that buildup of grime and stuff off of the rim. So all we're going to do is get our warm water going. I'm going to add some soap. And then I'm going to take my mouthpiece brush. I think I'll put some soap on it too. All right, just like you're brushing your teeth with a toothbrush. And insert it tapered end in. And then wipe down with your clean, dry cloth. And you're left with a clean, probably pretty shiny mouthpiece. And if you look down into the back bore on a shiny surface, you'll see that it's very clean and smooth, and that's what you want to be playing on. A couple of things to look for. If your mouthpiece is particularly tarnished, you can use the same trick of Wright silver polish. And same thing, you put that silver polish all around it and kind of buff it and work that silver polish in. Rinse it with some water, go back into the back bore with your brush to make sure there's no silver polish down in there. Rinse it all again, dry it off. It should be a lot better. Another note, a lot of times you'll notice, see how the end should be perfectly circular. And if you've dropped your mouthpiece one or more times, if it's out of round or if it's banged in, Will your trumpet still play? Yeah, but it's going to ultimately it's going to affect pitch and make the instrument less efficient in a number of different ways. So if you notice that the end is out of round, then when you take your trumpet in to get repaired, you may want to ask the brass technician to see. They've got special reamer tools and you know, mandrels and things that will help make that in round. Sometimes if a mouthpiece is really old, this end point gets real thin. I've seen it as, you know, like paper thin and even cracked. That's also a good indicator. It might be time to just replace a mouthpiece if you can. But yeah, that's basically all there is to it. Just get that mouthpiece brush in there and clean that out. You know, and you can go from the cup end a little bit, but most of it's from the, the backbore side in. Soap and water, rinse it out with warm water, dry it off, and you're in good shape. I think you got a clean trumpet now. Have a good one.